Okay, I'm turning the mic on, turning the camera
Okay,
Yes.
so, my computer's actually got to die. Let's see. Sorry. To turn this off. Okay, so, roll call, we have Jenny, Dominic, Morris, I see Linda Benoff online, and Crystal is online.
Right.
Oh, Ronnie had just joined. So Ronnie, we're just doing roll call. So this evening's meeting, I have a number of items on the agenda that I'm keeping on the agenda so that we don't lose track of them. Crystal and I have met with Craig Haig to talk through some of the issues around the ADUs and zoning. And I think we need further discussion with him to come up with a plan before we bring it to this group, and he will come and meet with us to talk us through it, but we're still working through some of the details on that. So we're not going to go through the ADU stuff tonight.
Okay.
So we're really going to STRs and tree ordinance. I'm just keeping out there. I talked to Nathan about the tree ordinance, keeping that on there so we don't lose track of it.
I'm sorry, who's Nathan?
CAC.
Okay.
He had wanted us to take up the tree ordinance and revisit it. If what he has envisioned is much more scaled back than what was there before. So talked to him today, and we don't have any new updates on that from what he had sent to me before. So I'm just keeping that on there. So what we're really going to talk about this evening is the ETPA resolution and try to talk through what this amendment is, what law it's amending. And I have reached out to the sponsors of the amendment also to ask for some clarification. So when the thing that strikes me, and Crystal's going to talk us through the amendment, the thing that's unknown to me is how this would interface with the rent controls in good cause eviction. The rent stabilization rules are quite different, and it limits increases. At the moment, I think it's still 2%. I sent you a fact sheet with that. We would, I don't know whether we would have to have our own board, rent regulatory board here, or whether, I think we probably would. But that board is what sets. So when I was on my own, Nassau County follows New York City. And the fact sheet that I sent you gives you the suburbs of New York City and so forth. So the question to me is, if a unit met criteria to be under the rent stabilization piece, and also met criteria to be in good cause, then which law would take precedence? And that's what I sent to the sponsors to ask them if they could clarify that.
Did you get an answer?
No, I haven't. I'll follow up with them again. I haven't gotten an answer back. So Crystal, with that introduction, do you want to talk us through what this amendment is and what it is doing? You're on mute, Crystal.
Sorry, I was having some computer issues. So what I had looked at with the amendment specifically is the requirement, or essentially what it's doing is by alleviating the requirement for the city to engage in a full-on study in order to be able to adopt rent stabilization laws underneath the EPTA. Because as you know, the EPTA right now requires that study, and the city has opted not, did not move forward with it because of the cost and because of the concern that the study was going to bring back and actually not show that meet the criteria that was going to be required for that emergency situation in order to have those to implement or rent stabilization laws. What this does, the amendment or proposed amendment would do, is allow for, municipalities to move forward without going through that full-on study. They can actually use different types of data that should already be available to the city through different resources and be able to go through it that way so that they can, if they want to, move forward with rent stabilization laws on a less onerous criteria. With respect to the good faith or the good cause eviction in the EPTA, I haven't dug into it too much, except to say for the fact that the good cause eviction law does accept from it specifically any dwelling units that are already regulated, are already subject to rent regulations. The EPTA, by its very nature, is a rent regulation. I would think that that would mean that essentially any units that are subject to rent stabilization would then be accepted from good cause eviction, because there is a whole different form of criteria that apply to them under the EPTA.
So
That's
in
what
that
it's
case, Crystal, it sounds like the ETPA would take precedence over good cause if you had a unit that met criteria for both.
Yes, that's what I would say. Now, remember too, that EPTA, the good cause eviction law can actually apply to less units than the EPTA does. So the EPTA has, I think, a minimum of 6 units, that in 6 units or 6 apartments or 6 units in one building. The good cause eviction law, the municipalities are able to define what that small landlord is. So you might have situations in which good cause eviction or EPTA would not ever be able to apply to, a situation where you've got a landlord that only has two apartments, as opposed to good cause eviction, which could apply to that.
And so the other thing that I noticed in it was good cause excluded properties that were built in the last 15 years or had major rehab. And this revision explicitly includes that everything within the last 15 years. That was another piece that I picked up on. So that's a piece where good cause doesn't cover a certain subset of properties that this amendment would cover.
Yeah, so the requirements, those, requirements to offer a renewal lease that are in the EPTA that are already written in there, they would apply to any units that are covered by the EPTA. They would take precedent, because the way I'm reading good cause, it wouldn't apply to good cause.
Right, though the good cause excludes anything built in the last 15 years. Whereas
Well, not just that, but any units subject to regulation. So that's where it's
Right.
you've either got the EPTA or you've got good cause. You'd have, a potential to have a protection under one of them.
Okay. Right. So with that said, I'll wait and hear what the sponsors come back and say. Do we have any observations on this, or I don't know if you've had time to look at ETPA. Ronnie, do you have any thoughts on this? And you're on mute, by the way.
No, nothing at the time. Crystal was pretty comprehensive.
Okay, hang on. Well, no. We're going to say something, Dominic?
Yeah, so my thought though is that good cause eviction is a different subject matter because it's about a good, someone having, a tenancy, without a lease, as long as they're paying their rent. So what happens if the property, is affected by both laws? So if someone says, we're going to raise your rent, so the person says, oh, I have no problem paying that rent, but they want to evict them. So wouldn't a good cause then be utilized then?
So I think what Crystal is saying, so first of all, yes, the bulk of good cause is about evictions, but good cause has rent.
Right, I know, right. Right.
So from what Crystal is saying is that anything that falls under any form of regulation is exempt from good cause. That's not included. So for example, public housing isn't part of
Sure.
good cause, right?
Sure.
Anything where the rent is tied to income level If it's up to 80% or 130% of AMI, that's not covered by good cause. So those are all off the table for good cause.
Right.
ETPA could, as long as there were 6 units, would apply to those properties. And the other thing that it applies to is properties built in the last 15 years that good cause excluded. They were not part of the language in good cause. So I think the issue is, and we will hopefully hear back from the sponsor, but I think the issue is that one or other of these statutes would apply, but not both.
Right, so the EPT law, what we're saying, for the RGB, the Rent Guidance Board, they set the guidelines for the
Yes.
rent
They set the guidelines for rate increases.
rate increases, but not for the rent.
No, I don't believe they set it for the base.
Right, so I mean, conceivably, the rent could start at 1,500.
I haven't, I tried to go through the law. Crystal and I haven't gone through it in detail, but I don't believe that it addresses the base rent. What it really
Right.
focuses on is what percent increase can occur and what percent increase can occur if you do improvements to an individual unit or if you do improvements to the building as a whole. And
Right.
There's a whole schedule for amortizing that over a 12-year period for some building types and 12 and a half for others.
Right, so the guidance is only based on after the base is already set initially when somebody moves in.
Well, in the rent stabilized building that I lived in, that was the case. That was in Nassau County. So we had, it's also unfair to me, because I think from what I read in the fact from the 2024 thing, that they can still, when there's a vacancy, increase the rent
Right.
by up to 20%. But I got conflicting information about that, where another source told me no, in 2019 they took that out. So in my situation, in that building, the rent was set based upon whoever had vacated, and then they would increase it by whatever they could increase it by. And then once the lease starts, then rent increases were controlled by rent stabilization. And they were fixed to a certain percentage every year. So Tom?
Yes, Crystal, correct me if I'm wrong, but what's on the table is not ETPA, but an amendment to ETPA.
Correct.
Yeah, the rest.
Yeah,
That's correct.
yes, it's the
Just wanna make
amendment
that
that
clear,
speaks
so-
to that analysis.
Right,
Right,
but
so
the
we're not-
point, Tom, is
Right?
that it's an amendment to a statute that's on the book. So
Got
therefore,
it.
we have to
But then we have
understand,
to support that.
we have to understand the statute and
Absolutely.
how the amendment changes the statute. And the key things that
I
it
get that.
changes are the 15-year piece
Mhm.
and the fact that you don't have to do a vacancy study.
Right.
Those are the two key pieces.
Right. Secondly, if we do go forward and actually approve ETPA, we still have to have a county board?
I think so, actually. I think that, I don't think we would be,
I mean, that's what it says in the law, but
sorry?
it does say that.
Yeah, I don't think we would be under New York City. Because
No,
all of Long Island is under New York City.
Right, oh, no.
Yeah,
interesting.
like when I was in Nassau County, I'm pretty sure that our rent increases were based upon recommendations from the rent control board in the city. I don't think we had a separate one.
Yeah, no, I don't think so either.
That's why it's hard right now to see how this plays out in the state, because it could change whatever, you know what I mean, what's being proposed with the state hashing out just like good cause eviction, right? So what it starts is not going to be what it ends.
So, right, but the other thing is that we're not at the point here of talking about adopting ETPA.
Correct.
This is a resolution in support of an amendment that has not yet been passed. It's still in,
Correct.
it's still in the assembly and in the Senate
Right.
being worked
And
on.
it just makes, if we want to go with ETPA, the process a little bit easier.
Excuse me?
Without the vacancy.
Right,
Yeah, right. Without
it just, if we
Without-
decide to go with
Yeah.
ETPA, it makes the process.
declaring it, causing an emergency, and then without the vacancy.
Right.
Because the municipalities that attempted under the old scenario were unsuccessful, and I think they had lawsuits.
Yes, they did, and they lost.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's anything else we can discuss on this. ETPA itself And I'll just say, I mean, Crystal, you're saying it only applies to buildings that have 6 units or more, of which we have some of the newer ones, but all of the one that just went up on 7th Street is linked to income, so that would be exempt. It's also exempt, yes, because it's regulated. Anything that's regulated.
Yeah, tax, tax.
Some of the,
I'm not sure that's actually, I mean, it's not regulated by the state, it's only regulated by the IDA, so I'm not sure it's the same thing.
some of the units are,
So
Yes.
some of them are market, none
They're at market.
of the units currently on the building that is opening in July, they're all linked to income. The higher income level is 130%. They had originally intended to do market rate, and the negotiation of the pilot resulted in the entire building being linked to income. So,
Yeah, workforce housing.
sorry,
Wasn't it it's workforce housing, I thought.
excuse me?
Isn't it workforce
I don't know
housing?
what you want to call it. I know that it's 130% of it.
But again, I wonder if that's considered, Crystal, a regulated building, if it's just.
Well, anyway, it's,
Okay.
yeah, but anyway, it's, well, in
It's
terms
exempt
in terms of good cause, it's excluded from this, right? But I don't know whether it would fall under
Right.
ATPA or not.
Okay.
Crystal, do you know if that would be considered regulated?
I would have to look at it. I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look at that question.
Okay, so, but the other thing, I'm just thinking through the housing that's in Hudson. And there really are not that many buildings that have 6 units, right? There are some, but not that many. And certainly there aren't very many that are not regulated in some fashion, right? And we don't know the answer to 7th Street. The concern I would have with ETPA with small landlords who have only, well, first of all, how many buildings will we have that would be impacted? I mean, would it even apply? And if, I guess the small landlord thing doesn't come into play, because if I had a 2-family home, it wouldn't fall under ETPA.
these are the
correct?
same questions we asked when we were
Right.
looking at good cause. And we don't have a study, and that's a problem. When you're talking about, you're spitting in the wind, like, we don't have any we don't
Can I
have the
just ask
data.
Crystal a question? Crystal, you're sure that ETPA only applies to buildings with 6 units or more, correct?
I'm looking at a government issued fact sheet right now, just to make sure that cheat sheet, and it says that it applies to residential dwellings containing 6 or more units.
And in the amendment, does the amendment stick with that? Or for municipalities with less than 1 million people, which is us, does it make a revision to that?
I haven't specifically looked at that question. I would have to take a look at it. I don't know.
Okay, hang on. Go ahead, Tom.
Regulation.
Oh, I just wondered why it's of a concern whether it affects 1 building or 100 buildings. I mean,
It would just be good to know.
Well,
it might be good, but it's, I mean,
that wasn't where I was going with that thought.
excuse me?
That wasn't where I was going with that thought.
Oh, no, well, that's what I was asking.
No, I was kind of trying to think through it, and I was thinking, well, wait a minute, if you have to have 6 or more units, then you're not really talking.
Oh, yeah.
What I was-
just got the point.
Right, well, what I was thinking of was, if this were going to apply to small landlords who had, say, two family houses, and they were being told that the rent increase could not exceed, let's say the county decided it was going to be 2%. I think we would lose more rental houses. That's where I was going with that.
Okay.
But that's why I think we need to, I can't read this down. Can you?
Wait,
pull up
where do you
the
look at
amendment?
Do you want this?
Yeah.
I think one of the big changes is the 1974.
I'm sorry, which one are you looking at?
I want to look at the amendment. Go ahead,
No, that's the amendment. Yeah.
go ahead, Dominic.
I think the big change is the 15-year compared to the 1974, right? Because
That's a big change.
right, that's a big change in terms of what's eligible for the building, because, initially, our stock, right, in 1974 was even smaller. So I think with the change of the 15 years, it's going to increase it, but again, how much it's going to increase it, and how many properties, and where we're going to target those properties, and how we're going to enforce it, those properties, right? in terms of, making sure they're doing the right thing. That's another thing in terms of enforcement.
I think that the people that are the renters would be the ones enforcing it because they would say, hey, I know that under ETPA, I shouldn't have my rent raised more than 2%, and my landlord has raised it 6%, and now I'm going to seek out some help.
But again, like the good cause eviction, right? The only way to really enforce good cause eviction is actually go through the eviction process, right? So how does this,
It doesn't have the same procedures at all.
that's what I'm saying.
Right, but I think.
So we go to the board, the regulating board?
But the key issue here is what Crystal was saying, and I think that this is probably correct because of the regulatory piece, is that ETPA would probably take precedence over good cause.
No, what I'm saying is, right?
You're not going to be under both.
No. What I'm saying is right now, the only way to enforce good cause eviction for, say, if I'm under good cause eviction and my landlord is in violation, the only way I can pursue that is go through eviction court right now. I have to go through the eviction process.
Right.
So in this situation, how do you enforce it in terms of, is it the rental guidance board? Where's say if I have a complaint, so wait, my landlord raised it too high, where does the enforcement come into play?
I believe the enforcement comes from the rent control board.
Okay, gotcha.
And I also believe that there is very little leeway because it's all laid out as to exactly what percent rent can be raised.
Right.
And if they do improvement on a unit, it has to be amortized over 12.5 years, blah, blah, blah. It's all laid out. And so therefore, there is no scenario where in good cause, for example, a landlord can go and appeal and say, I had to put in 50,000 into this building, therefore I need to raise the rents by more than the 8% that has been permitted under good cause. In this scenario, there is no latitude for that scenario because they already set up tiers. They have various amounts for capital improvement, and they have an amortization schedule.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not like a landlord can go to the court and say, or go to the board and say, I've had these expenses, therefore I need to raise the rent by 5%. That's not an option under it.
Right.
So if this passes this date, did we have to put together a board then? And is it a county-wide board? Is it a city-wide board? Is it
So let me follow up on that.
ETPA says a county board, that's what I was asking.
county?
Yeah.
I think it's county.
I do believe it is a county board.
Okay. I'd also love to see,
Oh, and sorry,
These-
just one other thing about the board. So when I was reading this, Crystal, also it does allow for variances by municipality, as far as I recall.
That is very likely the case, but I'd have to go back
Yeah.
and look at it. Yeah.
So, on, Jenny?
I'd really like to see the two laws next to each other, like the main points that we've been picking out. And just like on one page, so that we can look at it and go, okay, which one would take precedence? In the case that and so that we can, since I'm a visual person, when I see something on paper, things side by side, it makes more sense to me. So, I mean, maybe I'll do that for myself, but if you've already got something like that, Crystal, that would be awesome. Like something that just, here are the scenarios and bang,
But part of that was part of my.
Wait, are you talking good cause and EPTA, or are you talking the
Yes.
EPTA amendment and EPTA? Okay, so good cause and EPTA.
The amendment.
Well, no, the amendment, you have to look at ETPA, because the amendment only addresses, we're going to make it.
No, I understand, but so whatever it would be amended, because we're not talking about the original, we're talking
That
about.
was one of the documents that's.
No, I understand, but the whole point of this is that they're doing an amendment, we're supposed to be supporting it. That's the whole
Right.
impetus of the resolution. So the original with the amendment is what I'm talking about.
Okay, well, you do have that because the original law, you have to, hang on. let
You're
me-
not understanding what I'm saying.
Let me finish what I was saying.
One side versus the other. So
Okay, you do
this-
have that. You do have that.
no, I don't, we don't have that. We don't have good cause next to
Okay.
EPTA, and like, what are the differences and why are we, which things don't overlap, which is going to take precedence? They're not on the same page.
So wait,
If
you
it's
are
just-
looking for good cause in EPTA. That because initially you mentioned EPTA amendment and EPTA, so I just want to make sure I'm clear now. Good cause versus EPTA.
Yes,
And
Okay.
Crystal, before we embark on that, I think, let's get an answer from the sponsors about how they see this interfacing with good cause. Because that was the question that I posed to them. And we think that ETPA would take precedence over good cause, but let's hear back from them as to where these two overlap.
Well, I think also you gotta know the property, right? Because there's two different times, right? So EPTA is 50, that the proposed is 15 years, where rent is 2010, right? So the property itself might not be eligible for one or the other. So,
If there are any new properties are not eligible for good cause.
right, that's what I'm saying.
Right.
There's
Those by definition are not under good cause, they would only be under ETPA. Go ahead.
only, that's what I'm saying. So,
Yeah.
so that, it also goes by what property it
But,
is.
right,
Yes.
but the question that I'm asking is if you have a 20-year-old building
Mhm.
that potentially could fall under either
Both.
one of these,
Yeah, right.
which one takes precedence?
Right.
That's the question that I posed to the sponsors.
Yeah,
Tom, you had a comment?
Yes, it's actually a question. I'm wondering what this means in the amendment. A city of under 1 million residents or town of village may add classes of accommodation to regulation under this act in buildings containing fewer than 6 units. Does that mean, unlike the typical ETPA, we could actually lower it from 6?
that's.
There are certain classes built into EPTA as that could be the case. And I'd have to look at that a little bit further. I know that there are certain classes built into EPTA. So if there's a building that has less than 6 units that was built before a certain year and receives certain types of tax incentives, then it could be subject to EPTA. It's nuanced. But I will look at that to see if that's a way for the city to actually change and actually have a smaller amount of essentially something akin to that small landlord apply under the amendment.
Thank you.
So we need to check the classes language and what classes that applies to. That's going to be found, I think, in the original ETPA language, because that was not amended in this particular thing. The piece that you just quoted, may add classes of accommodation, is a new piece. We want to hear back from the sponsors, and we need to clarify what the situation is with regard to a county board. But again, the resolution is about whether or not we want to pass a resolution supporting the amendment to ETPA. So has Michelle been involved at all in this? Dominic, I didn't have time to chat her.
I've talked to her about it. I mean, she's willing to talk to,
Could she come to our next meeting, perhaps?
I'm sure she would.
So did she put together the resolution?
No,
Where did that come from?
that's a good question. When did it start? Someone sent it to me. I'm trying to think. Who did? I'll have to look at my email to check.
So I think whoever
It was
put
probably
this,
one of the housing advocates.
whoever put it together, I think it would be helpful if they would come and present the resolution.
Sure.
Was it the guy from Trump?
Sorry,
For the many?
That's what I can't remember. If it was someone there, if it was.
Robin, Claire,
From,
Yeah, it could have been, any of those. That's all right. Okay,
because they were both here for the last thing.
I know, that's why I can't remember which one.
Before we voted on good cause. There was county data that was going to come out 2 weeks after. Do we have that data?
Yeah,
It's in the IDA document.
yeah.
It came out, I think not this month, but maybe last month.
Last month.
RJH, I think it was it RJH? No, the RJH, the finance people.
Yeah.
But in the IDA folders from, not the most recent meeting, but the one before, you should be able to find that report. And if you can, let me know and I'll send it to you.
Okay.
And as a caution, remember, some of these studies include in vacancy a different definition. They include weekenders, short-term rentals, things like that.
Okay.
And they're not technically vacant by this standard.
Right.
And I think that,
So anything that's census-based will treat a person whose second home is here as vacant.
Okay.
And that's why you see some of the numbers you see floating around for vacancy
Or wait,
are
Are
higher
higher.
because
Yeah.
those are actually not vacant. It's just, you can only answer the census from one address.
and I think 2 years ago, I think Michelle Tulo did a vacancy housing through pattern of progress too. In terms of, this vacant housing in the city. Like, what are not being used at all, from my understanding.
Okay.
So there might be somewhere, Michelle might have that.
Well, I know she and Craig were looking at abandoned houses, which is kind of exactly.
No, I think this is like, units that were vacant and something in that regard. Because she came out with a number, how many are actually vacant?
I think Margaret's correct.
Was it through vacancy law?
Yeah.
Because they were trying to.
What did we use with that? Did we use that data to help?
Well, no, they were looking at that, to look at, their penalties
Right.
for, properties that are, abandoned or, and you have to pay a fee if you have a.
I know. I know there's loopholes. Did we?
No, Craig and Michelle did work through that. And in one of, I can't remember which meeting it was in, might have been here. He had identified which ones were like the ones that he was working on, that he was getting assessing fines and so on. And then there were a small number, right, I think it was less than 10.
Yeah.
That were true problem properties.
Through only 10 having fit under
That
the
were
criteria?
genuine problems where they weren't able to resolve the issues.
Okay, gotcha.
So
And
there's one on Union Street.
Yeah, I know
there's
that.
one across the street from me. And were they fined?
Well, the one on Union Street,
They can't find the
there
label.
has been a lot of legal activity around that one, and the city has done everything in its power.
They don't live anywhere. They can't find them.
Well, no, they do know where they are, and we have been in touch with them, and the taxes are all up to date. But there's nothing that can be done for somebody who owns a property that they are paying taxes on. Other than the fact that, there should be some code enforcement issues around some of these houses. But, there are a small number of properties that they are working on to try to get resolution. But it's not a big number.
So when you said resolution in terms of having them fulfill the vacancy law as it is?
Well, in one case, there's actually an arrest warrant out for the owner. That would be a resolution.
Is it Joe Pesci? Is it Joe Pesci? From the Super, remember the Super, the movie Super,
No.
where they made him go and live in the apartment?
Oh, yeah.
They actually did that to someone recently in New York City because he was such a bad landlord. Instead of sending him to jail, they made him live in one of his apartments.
Huh.
All right, so I think, Crystal, I think we need to get some more clarification on this. I don't think we're gonna have, there's no urgency on this because it hasn't gotten out of
Right.
Assembly and Senate anyway. We'll do some more work on getting clarification, bring it up here, and then hopefully at our next meeting, we'll have Craig to talk about the ADUs and zoning. We're making progress on that.
That I think is slightly more urgent too.
Yes, it is more
Yeah,
urgent.
So
because the state,
Funded.
if they
Yeah.
issue more funds. we
I
will
talked to
be eligible.
somebody, I'm sorry, I talked to somebody in the fifth ward who would like to get into that program, so,
But the state hasn't issued a nut third round yet.
right. I think she still qualifies for this room.
There's no money.
Oh, there's no, okay, then it is for the third round.
We're waiting, we're waiting for the next round.
We won't know until the
This
budget.
may or may not happen in the current environment.
There's someone in the fourth ward who wants to do it too, regardless of funding.
But I mean, at the moment, the way you would do that is by going before the ZBA.
Yeah.
And Kristen, I did get a complete list of all of the ZBA decisions over the last few years. And overwhelmingly, they are about area coverage or area stuff. And so as we do this, the other thing I want us to try to address is infill housing. So not just, we can have one set of rules for if you're doing an accessory unit. This is what, this scenario is. But then if you have a lot that you want to build and you want to get offsets for, being able to go to within 5 feet and not to have to do a front or backyard offset, that I think would be very helpful to, particularly to small developers who want to just build single homes.
Remember that, accessory dwelling unit aside, with the city going through its comprehensive plan process, typically the next step after that, after a comp plan is revised and adopted, that next step is taking a holistic view at the zoning for that municipality and seeing what really should be changed to go in line with those recommendations. So I would just caution about taking on too big of a look at zoning as a whole until that process is complete, because you guys are you're really close. You're kind of hand in hand with all of that.
Okay, but you don't see any issue with going ahead with addressing the ADU issue?
No, there's a need for that right now, and there's funding for it. I don't think that's going to be a problem.
Okay, all right. So next month we'll come back to ADU. We'll hopefully have more clarity on this resolution, and I don't have anything else. Any public comments? Do we, Logan, does anybody have the numbers?
Yep.
Anybody in the room? Motion to adjourn?
Make that motion.
Okay, thanks,
Second.
Ronnie.
Thank you.